The Greek gods had a very exclusive menu. Ambrosia to eat, nectar to drink, no bread, no watered wine, and apparently no need to check whether anyone had made enough for 12 Olympians. There is just one problem. No surviving Greek text gives us a reliable recipe for either one. Was ambrosia fruit? Honey? A cake? Something no mortal kitchen could make at all? And if the gods never went hungry, why did people keep bringing them food? The answer begins with two completely different menus, one served in stories on Olympus, and one offered by real people at altars below. In Homer's Odyssey, the god Hermes visits Calypso's island. She sets ambrosia before him and mixes red nectar for him to drink. A little later, she packs bread, water, and wine for the very mortal Odysseus. The contrast could not be clearer. Gods get the deathless menu. Humans get lunch. Except Greek poetry rarely stays that tidy. Ambrosia and nectar can change roles in other poems, and ambrosia does much more than sit on a plate. It perfumes bodies. It restores beauty. Most strangely, it protects the dead from decay. When the warrior Sarpedon is killed in the Iliad, Apollo washes his body and anoints it with ambrosia before sleep and death carry him home. Later, Thetis uses ambrosia and nectar to keep the body of Patroclus from rotting, while Achilles prepares to return to battle. That makes ambrosia less like one secret ingredient and more like the substance of deathlessness. Wherever it appears, ordinary human decay seems to lose its grip. Homer makes that difference startlingly physical. During a battle, the warrior Diomedes manages to wound Aphrodite in the hand, but she does not bleed. A divine fluid called ichor flows from the cut instead. The poet even tells us why. The gods do not eat bread or drink wine, so they do not have blood like ours. Different diet, different veins. This is not ancient medicine. It is myth, using food to explain a body that can be hurt, but cannot become fully human. Ambrosia and nectar mark the line between people who age, starve, and die, and gods who do not. Which makes the behavior of Greek worshippers look a little strange. Why offer dinner to beings who do not need it? People gave the gods foods they actually valued: grain, wine, oil, fruit, cakes, and animals. The exact offering depended on the place, period, deity, and occasion. There was no single Greek menu for every god. Some gifts were modest. A person could pour a libation, a drink offering tipped onto the ground or an altar, instead of being swallowed. A farmer might dedicate the first part of a harvest. A household could offer a cake made from useful grain. Other occasions were public and expensive. As we saw with lamb, a sacrificed animal could be divided so that selected bones and fat burned for the god, while people cooked and shared much of the edible meat. The smoke rose, the wine disappeared into the earth. The cake no longer belonged to the person who brought it. That was the point. An offering turned something useful into something given. It made respect visible. It could say thank you, fulfill a promise, ask for help, or acknowledge that rain, health, victory, and harvests were never completely under human control. This was not a divine vending machine. One goat did not automatically purchase one thunderstorm. The gift opened a relationship. The god received honor and a recognized share. At many sacrifices, the people received dinner and a place in the gathering. So the same food reached in two directions. Upward, it connected mortals to a god. Around the altar, it connected mortals to one another. And one grieving goddess brings the two menus together. In the Homeric hymn to Demeter, Demeter has lost her daughter, Persephone. For 9 days she wanders with torches and refuses ambrosia and nectar. Then, disguised as an old woman at Eleusis, she is offered sweet wine. She refuses that, too. Instead, Demeter asks for a drink called kykeon. The hymn's ingredient list is wonderfully plain: water, barley meal, and tender pennyroyal stirred together. No golden platter, no cloud garnish, just grain, water, and an herb. It is one of the rare moments when an ancient text comes close to giving us a recipe connected to a god. But it leaves out the quantities, temperature, and almost every detail a modern cook would want. And pennyroyal can be toxic, especially in concentrated form, so this is history, not a drink recommendation. What matters is the choice. The goddess of grain refuses the food of immortality and asks for a humble grain drink while grieving for her child. Food does not just tell us what kind of body she has. Refusing it, then choosing differently, tells us how she feels. So, what did the Greek gods really eat? In stories, ambrosia and nectar gave poets a way to imagine bodies beyond hunger, aging, and decay. They were not a lost superfood, so much as a sign that the gods were not built like us. In worship, the gods received the foods humans valued, not because Olympus had run out of groceries, but because pouring, burning, and dedicating food turned respect into an action. The gods received a share, an aroma, and honor. The people below received a relationship, a meal, and a way to understand their place in the world. The most important thing on the gods' table was not ambrosia. It was the distance between that table and ours, and all the food humans used to reach across it. If you could taste one food from Greek mythology, what would it be? Tell me in the comments and subscribe, because next time we are asking what the Greeks fed not to the gods, but to the dead.